Hi there, good afternoon. This is Joanna Nelson, and we will be starting the webinar in about 2 minutes. In the meantime, we're going to launch a quick poll if you want to take a few seconds to let us know with what organization you're with. If I can open poll. Oh, okay. We'll start in about 2 minutes. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So I think everybody is in listen-only mode except for the organizers. So we'll all mute our phones when we're not talking. But good afternoon. My name's Joanna Nelson. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to join us for the webinar this afternoon. I'm on the New Mexico Economic Development Department's finance team, and I'm a finance development specialist. And I also help to manage the New Mexico Fund It group, which this webinar today is a part of our ongoing educational Fund It webinar series. And the title is Demystifying the New Markets Tax Credit Program. And we're really excited that John Brooks from the New Mexico Finance Authority is here today. And actually, New Mexico Finance Authority is a part of the Fund It group. So before we begin, just wanted to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and we will post this on our YouTube page, our New Mexico Economic Development Department YouTube page, and all attendees that signed up for the webinar will receive the link to the recording, and they'll receive the presentation that we give today. So no need to fret about that. Also, if you have to step off for any reason, you can get filled in later. So to give you a little bit of brief background about Fund It, just before we get into our presentation so you can understand Fund It's mission and goals. This is, it is an informal group, and it's made up of a couple different types of entities. So we have federal and state representatives of different programs that are representing funding programs. So they have loans or grants that they're representing. And then we also have COG directors, which stands for Council of Government Directors. And then we have our New Mexico regional reps. And so out of that group, we have the mission to help communities and local governments and entities navigate the funding process and funding challenges when they have economic development or infrastructure projects. So when they're trying to cobble together different types of funding sources or begin to try to understand how they're going to fund a project, this group convenes quarterly to hear pitches from these different communities about their projects. So when that community is in front of the group and they've made their pitch, they've made their presentation, the group is able to offer back their expertise, their knowledge, their insight, their guidance into how to address the financing challenges. So it's a really great opportunity for the different communities around the state to network face-to-face with the actual funders and the funding entities. And it's a fantastic way to tap into the expertise that's already out there in the state, because the COG directors are familiar with many of the projects that are happening in the region and might have past projects that are very similar. So it's a great sharing situation where everyone can learn from each other. So here's an example of some of the entities that are represented. And I think officially there's about 13, but even if they're not officially a part of the group, we often act as advocates and liaisons to find the right funding entity and often bring them to the table as well. And then in addition to the meetings that we have quarterly and the educational webinar series, we have created an online tool that is available to anyone that is trying to figure out what funding sources are available for their particular project. So this is a way that you can go to that website that's listed at the top, and then broken down by category. So for example, this is showing transportation, housing, community development. So there's several other components which often come up in an economic development or infrastructure project. You can say, okay, my project has a transportation element, and then here you'll see the different programs that might fit and your project might be eligible for, and then you can click on that link and go to that page to get more information about the program. So this is, if you go to this, it is very useful, but this is version 1.0, so hopefully we'll make some improvements, and we're open to feedback. But the whole purpose, if you can surmise, is that the group is in existence to help educate the state on financing and finding solutions to funding problems for different projects. So without further ado, we will jump into the presentation. John Brooks is here from the New Mexico Finance Authority, and he's going to be walking us through the exciting topic of New Markets Tax Credit Program, and we've gotten a lot of questions about it, and it's always a really important tool that's brought up in the funded discussions, but a lot of people see it as complex, or they don't understand the ins and outs of it. So hopefully today you'll gain a good understanding of it. And I didn't mention either, I'm sorry, that Juan Torres, the finance team director, is also on the line and will be available for questions too. So John, you want to take it away?
Sure. Thanks, Joanna, for the introduction. Excuse me. So before I get started, I know that a lot of people are hoping that with this presentation, you will be a complete industry knowledge about new market tax credits. I will safely say that you will have a good background, and it took me 5 years to understand the program, but that was just a bad joke. So anyways, let's get started and talk about the New Market Tax Credit Program. Today, we will go over some of the New Markets basics and look at a sample structure. We also will look at what makes a successful project. So if you have a project that you're looking at and you think that it would qualify for New Markets and you want to submit an application, we will go through that process to determine if your project is something that you could submit and would be successful with our program. Then we'll go into some sample projects that we have completed in the past here in the state, and then finally conclude with some questions and some information about upcoming deadlines that we have in the New Markets program.
Hey, John, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. Sorry. I forgot to mention that you are more than welcome to write questions in the bottom right hand of the screen in the little gray tab that says questions as we go along, and I'll compile them and we'll ask John at the end. So go ahead. Sorry, John.
No problem. So real quick about the Finance Authority and how do we got introduced into this particular program. The Finance Authority was created in 1992, and basically it was created as a function of the legislative body to help coordinate and finance public projects. And so in 1994, the authority had approximately $2 billion worth of projects through its 16 different programs. And the 16 different programs range from public finance and private finance. And in 2003, the Finance Authority broadened some of our financing ability by introducing a legislation called the Statewide Economic Development Finance Act, which allowed the Finance Authority to work with the Economic Development Department to finance private entities throughout the state without any issues with the state anti-donation laws. And part of that 2003 legislation gave us the ability to apply for the New Market Tax Credit program at the federal level. So let's go into some of the program basics and the structure of the New Market Tax Credit program. So what are New Market Tax Credits, and why would we want to use it, and how does this thing work, and why is there so many different components to it, is something that we're going to talk about in this particular section. The New Market Tax Credit program, it typically funds about 20 to 25% of your project when it's leveraged with other funds. So those other funds could be equity that you may have in a company. It could be borrowed funds. So if you got a loan from a bank, or if you got a loan from any financial institution, we could leverage those particular monies. Or you could take grants that you receive from the federal or state level and leverage those dollars in a New Market Tax Credit structure. The New Market Tax Credit structure will provide, again, 25% of the total project amount. Now, a CDE, which is a community development entity, will provide flexible terms and the allocation that is necessary in order to fund the New Markets portion of the transaction. Now, the interest rates that we typically use in a New Market Tax Credit program are fairly low, and what we see typically is a 7-year compliance period or loan period in which there will be a convert or a conversion of some of the principal at the end of 7 years. So what are New Market Tax Credits, and when did it start? Well, the New Markets program started by the Bill Clinton administration and was implemented by the Bush administration. So this is one of the programs that garners support from both sides of the aisle. So both Republicans and Democrats typically support this particular program. And the Bush administration was the first administration that funded the New Markets program and has continued to receive additional funding throughout this current administration with upcoming allocation to be announced pretty soon. It is a shallow tax credit program, and it's focused on economic development in low-income communities. So when they designed this particular program, they were looking for an opportunity to get investors to invest in low-income communities that are designated by their census tracts. This program is administered through the Community Development Financial Institution, or the CDFI fund, which is a treasury arm of the United States Treasury. Entities that are going to receive an allocation from the CDFI fund or CDFI have to be a community development entity. So you have to apply to be a CDE. Once you become a CDE, then you can apply for an allocation of funds. Award-winning CDEs can invest in the new market tax credit into qualifying projects, and those qualifying projects could be business creation, expansion, community facilities, or even commercial real estate projects. So the new market tax credit provides a 39% tax credit for all the dollars that are invested in a particular project. So, for example, if you have $10 million and an investor wants to invest in your project, they will receive 39% of 39% tax credit for the $10 million that the project is worth. So if your project size is $10 million, the investor gets 39%, they get $3.9 million of tax credits. Those tax credits are used over the 7 years. So the first 3 years, they use it at 5%, and then the remaining 4 years, they get to reduce their tax liability by 6% for a total of 39%. The credits cannot be funded into projects that are considered SIM businesses or projects that have greater than 80% of their annual income into residential projects. In general, we typically look at allocation going into areas that are considered highly distressed. And these are two concepts that we'll talk about later on in the presentation as well. So why would you want to use new market tax credits? And why is this program an effective tool for economic development? The new market tax credit program is an ability to finance the gap that you may have in your capital stack. The new market tax credits, we typically look at projects between $5 to $50 million, but the sweet spot typically is between $10 and $15 million. And they could be located in rural and urban areas. So there's no issue in investing in either one of those typical areas. Now, the typical financing structure that you will see with the new market tax credit program is a below market rate program in which the loans are paid interest only during the 7-year compliance period. And approximately that reduces the amount of debt service that you would have to pay in your project and make the project more economically feasible because of the interest only payments that you would have to make. We typically like to use about $10 million, as I mentioned earlier, and you can expect that 25% of your capital stack for the project use come from the allocation from an investor in this particular project. So what you see on this particular chart is all the players that are associated with a simplified and leveraged model structure. And so when we look at the model that's before you, you look at two different sides. You have the loan component and then the equity component. Starting with the equity component of this leverage model that you see before you, the equity component comes from an investor that is looking to invest in your project. That investor will purchase the tax credits that are invested, that will go into your project, and they will monetize those tax credits at the day of closing. The unique thing about the investor, they are only interested in receiving the tax credits. They are not interested in getting a equity position in your project or in the company. So for them, the biggest thing is receiving the tax credits. On the other side of the transaction is the leverage lender. The leverage lender is typically a bank like Wells Fargo or some of the regional banks like Los Alamos National Bank or Citizens Bank of Las Cruces or even U.S. Bank. Also, we have you can use capital campaign funds. So if you have collected a pot of money that you want to use for your project, and that and that's part of your capital stack, you can use that as a leverage into this particular structure. As I mentioned before, you can use monies from federal or state grant programs to provide the leverage into a leverage model. And so when you have both the leverage lender and the equity component, they will put their monies into this investment fund, which will make what we call a QEI, or qualified equity investment, into a project. Now, in this particular structure, as you will see, the arrows point to the investment fund, and then goes down to the sub-community development entity. That community development entity, or CDE, is the entity that has the allocation of tax credits. So, for example, if you have a $10 million project, the allocation amount for this particular project is going to be $10 million. Now, that allocation is provided to the sub-community development entity and then lent down to the Qualified Active Low-Income Community Business, or QALC-B. So all the monies funnel down to that particular entity, which is the business itself, and they receive those monies in two separate loans. The first loan is the loan that's coming from the leverage lender. The second loan is an equity loan that's coming from the new market tax credit investor. Now, as I mentioned before, the repayments on these two loans are interest only. So these are interest-only loans for the whole 7-year period. Now, in some instances, a parent company would be the leverage lender. So if they are the leverage lender, they will also create what we call a SPE, or special purpose entity, that will be the borrower in this case. So again, the borrower is the QALC-B. The CDE is New Mexico Finance Authority, in this case when we have allocation. The leverage lender is the bank or any other sources of funds that will be used in the project. And the equity comes from an investor who is looking to invest in an area that's designated as a low-income area, so they can receive those tax credits over a 7-year period. The next few slides sort of reiterate some of the things that I just mentioned on the previous slide. You have information about the investor and their total benefit of 39% tax credits. And typically, the investor is paying between 76 cents and 88 cents per credit. So $1 per credit is worth 88 cents, and we'll monetize that in the future. The one thing about the investor, they do not want the tax credits to be recaptured. So they don't want the business to do anything illegal that will create a recapture event. And the Finance Authority works with the investor as the sub-community entity to make sure that that does not happen. Now, if there was a foreclosure or some issue with the business where they are not able to pay back the loans, we will work with the investor, the lender, to make sure that the funds do not get recaptured and invested into a new project. And this slide is really about the leveraged lender. Again, the leveraged lender is the senior lender into the transaction. They will lend their monies into the new market. So again, it could be a loan from the grant, a bank, or a parent company lending to a subordinated company. And the lender agrees to forbear and give up all its rights in terms of foreclosure for the 7-year compliance period. But we will work with them if there was an issue with some of the payments on the loans. The Community Development Entity, or CDE, that is Finance New Mexico, or New Mexico Finance Authority. Our primary mission is to take the allocation that we receive and invest it in different projects throughout the state of New Mexico. In this case, what we're looking to invest in are economic development type of projects that will create jobs, also projects that have a community benefit or community impact, such as community facilities like hospitals, schools, or anything of that nature. Also, we can look at operating businesses, small or large. And then the qualified active low-income community business. These are the businesses that are receiving the funds, and they basically are a operating business. And these are some of the things that they have to comply with in terms of meeting the standards for an operating business. So if you look at the 50% of gross income is derived from the business located in a low-income community, what that essentially means is that business has to be in a low-income census tract. And again, the program is designed to be in a low-income census tract. And when we look at and evaluate businesses and various projects, we look at the census tract in which that business is going to be operating. 40% of the tangible property is located in a low-income community business. Also, 40% of the services performed by its employees are located in the low-income community as well. And then, I'm sorry, the 5% number, basically you cannot have an investment on your books that exceeds 5% of your balance sheet. So that just makes sure that you are an operating business and not an investment company. So in terms of basic compliance requirements for a business and what we look for when we are looking at and evaluating different companies that we're going to invest in, first off, we look at the census tracts and make sure that the business is located in the highly distressed low-income community. Also, we look at the ineligible inactivity. So if there is a residential project and more than 80% of the income is from a residential dwelling, therefore we cannot invest in that project. So this has to be a mixed-use economic development project with a business that's doing at least 70% of commercial rent at that facility. Now, there are certain businesses that you cannot invest in through this program, and those businesses are called sin businesses. So racetracks, golf courses, gambling facilities, liquor stores, farming, and massage businesses are all sin businesses. Even though they're all exciting in their own way, they are considered sin. Now, one important and aspect of this particular program, an allocation of credits does not mean cash. So if we say you're going to get a $10 million allocation, that does not mean that you're going to get $10 million worth of cash. And here's the math how a new markets project works. So when you receive a $10 million allocation, the investor receives 39% tax credits for that particular project. So that 39% is $3.9 million. Let's say if the investor says, we will pay 82 cents per credit for this particular project. In this case, the 82 cents times by $3.9 million equates to $3,198,000 that's going into the project. Now, closing these things are fairly complicated, and so there are some legal fees that are associated and also closing costs. Once you take those out, the net cash that's going to the project is going to be $2,423,000. So if you look at the numbers and look at how the math works out, that $2.4 million equates to about 25% of the $10 million that you would need for a particular project. So the allocation, again, is based on the total project cost. The new markets rate is at 39%. The investor receives that 39%, and he pays a 82 cents credit, or he monetizes that at 82 cents to receive the $3.9 million that he's going to use over the 7 years. And as a net result, your company for your project receives $2 million of cash that you get to use at the day of closing. Now, if you're looking at the capital stack on this particular slide, I'm sorry that the numbers didn't line up right. I thought I fixed it, but it for some reason didn't work out. If you look at the project sources and how that works out, the project sources includes $2.5 million of capital campaign. So that's money that they may have received through some type of capital outlay or some type of fundraising that they may have put into for this project. Then they received another $4.5 million of state grants that they are going to use to leverage those dollars with. So the leverage loan is about $7 million for a $10 million project. What you don't see below the total number is there's a gap of $2.5 million in a $10 million project. That $4.2 million that we talked about on the previous slide fills the gap for your particular project. So therefore, your project uses is about $9.5 million. So that's how the math works out, and that's how the new markets work. Now, the power of new markets, based on that particular study, is when you consider the low cost of capital. So typically, the $2.4 million is lent into the structure at 2%. So it's a 2% fixed loan that's going into the structure. And so that is considered low cost of capital. Also, there is flexible loan terms. So what we do is we look at a longer amortization. So the amortization on a typical new market loan is 30 years, but it balloons at the 7-year period. Why does it balloon at the 7-year period? Is because the compliance period ends and the investor has utilized all 7 years the 7 years of the 39% of the tax credits that they receive. And so at that point, that $2.4 million converts from debt to equity. So what that means is that $2.4 million, the borrower gets to keep and don't have to repay that back. So $2.4 million you get to keep on your books at the end of 7 years if your project is successful. So now that we have talked about the structure a little bit, how does the New Mexico Finance Authority evaluate the projects and determine what makes a successful project and how we're going to invest in various projects throughout the state? Well, we look at the project types. Here are the different project types that we will look at when we evaluate different applications that we have received through the new market side. We have done, everything from mixed use, looking at a housing and commercial facility. We've completed grocery stores, hotels, nonprofit organizations, which I would consider some of the community businesses. Also, healthcare. Healthcare has been vital to the state, and because the state has a shortage of doctors, we have found that the New Markets program has been beneficial to help out with some of the shortage in the southern part of the state and also in the northwest part of the state with some of our investments. We could look at renewable energy, so wind, solar, any type of renewable energy, and you could twin it with renewable energy tax credits. Manufacturing, we have done several manufacturing organizations or companies in the Albuquerque and also now in the Roswell areas. So the New Markets tax credit program is flexible to use with any type of different businesses or projects that will arise here in the state. The next thing we look at is community benefit. So how does your project have an impact in the community in which it's going to be operating? So are there going to be any direct permanent jobs that's going to be created? What about the construction jobs that's being created in building a facility or renovating a facility? Indirect job creation. So is there any secondary or tertiary jobs that are going to be created because of your business being located in a certain census tract? So, for example, if you're a electronic manufacturer and you're buying your supplies from another company within the in the city in which you operate, that is additional job creation that can spin off because of the business being expanding in that particular area. Increase the tax base. So we hope that our investment into businesses that are in the low-income census tracts will increase the tax base in that particular census tract. Also, blight removal. There are areas that are considered brownfields, and we look at investing in those particular areas and help to revitalize a community that needs to be revitalized. So when we look at a New Market tax credit eligible area, and you can see the state of New Mexico here in the middle part, the areas that are in that sort of orange-looking color, those areas are designated as severe distressed or non-metropolitan areas. Those areas are considered eligible. Now, recognize that this is sort of a 30,000 feet view of the state of New Mexico, and you could drill down into some of the communities in the rural areas, and we could find out if those particular areas have qualified census tracts. The areas that are yellow, they are eligible, but they are not considered highly distressed. And then the gray areas are not eligible areas. However, if you look at the Carlsbad dot, you would notice that there's a lot of gray, but when you drill down to that particular area, there are qualified census tracts in Carlsbad. Now, to get to this particular map, there are several different organizations that have maps. The first one is the CDFI Fund. You could go to their website, and then they have a mapping page where you could get onto their map. Novogradic, which is an accounting firm within the new markets industry, has a map, and this is, I believe I've pulled this up from their map. And then another company is Baker Tilly. They have a map, and you could just Google new market tax credit eligible maps, and then one of these one of those links will pop up, and you could drill down with the address. Or you could call me or call the folks at Economic Development Department, and we could get that information for you as well. So what makes a good Qualic B candidate? What makes a good business that we want to invest in the new market tax credit area? So again, if their business is located in a highly distressed census tract, and they have to be considered a highly distressed census tract, they have to meet one of these 5 different criteria. So poverty is greater than 30%, median household income is less than 60% of the state average, unemployment is 1.5 times the national average, a non-metropolitan county, or 2 of any secondary criteria like a brownfield or any other, or it could be a hub zone. Opportunity zones we're still looking at, and I know that's a buzzword right now, but we're still looking at those as how they would be used with the new markets program. The one thing I would point out about a non-metropolitan county, when you look at an area like Cuba, New Mexico, which is a qualified census tract, but it is not a rural designated census tract. And the reason is because Cuba is within Sandoval County, which has Rio Rancho in it. Therefore, by having Rio Rancho in that particular county, that threw the whole county as urban, and as opposed to being a rural county. This is something we have been frustrated with for a number of years, and there's no changing the CDFI's position in terms of how to designate rural versus urban. Community impacts. We look at tangible community benefits. So again, quality of jobs. Are they going to provide some unmet good in that particular area, or provide services to low-income communities or folks that are in that area, or provide an environmentally stable facility, or provide a lot of construction jobs? Also, is this part of an economic revitalization plan? So I know a lot of areas are creating the metropolitan redevelopment areas through their city council. Those districts are something that we look at for community impacts, especially if that business is located in one of those designated areas. And then finally, the but-for test. The but-for test says, without the new market tax credits, you are unable to get this project completed. So you have a project, you have this financing gap, and you have no other means of getting that particular gap financed unless you have the new market tax credit. So that's what that but-for test gets at, and you have to write a strong but-for test when we evaluate the applications itself. And then once you've met all of these criteria, you're ready to go and start applying for the new markets program. And when we evaluate the application itself, you submit an application, and then the ranking team looks at each individual application, because we evaluate the allocation, and the allocation is divvy up based on the ranking of each individual project. So it is a competitive process. So based on the criteria that we just talked about on the previous slide, here's what we look at when we evaluate the application. the total maximum points you could get is 100 points, and you have to meet a threshold of 60 points. And then also you have to be a moderate ready project. So that means you're almost ready to hit the ground running, so almost shovel ready. So when you look at the 20 points for community impact and support, we look at quality of life, environmental impact. Is this a target industry, or is this a downtown redevelopment? So community impact is something that's very high on our list, and it's important when we evaluate some of these projects. And so, again, the quality of life really gets down to quality of life for the residents in that area, and do they have a close and direct proximity to the New Markets project itself. The next thing we look at is the job creation and unemployment. Job creation is, self-explanatory. You create some jobs, you get 10 points. If you retain jobs, so this project, let's say, renovates a facility, and you're going to be able to retain 100 jobs, for example, and then create 10 additional jobs. So that's what we evaluate when we look at job retention. Secondary and tertiary jobs at 5 points. Construction jobs, 5 points. Highway job creation, 5 points. And employee benefits, 5 points. And we, in our application process, we look at all these aspects of job creation and employment, and specifically employee benefits, because the one thing we want to do is have projects that impact folks' lives. So those benefits include healthcare expenses, or 401ks, dental plans, vision plans, or anything like that will give the employees the ability to be successful in the community they work. The next item is applicant need and readiness. So basically, is the project financially sound? So if you put together a pro forma, or you have a balance sheet and income statement, does it make sense? And does it show that for the next 7 years you are able to, based on your previous history, support a particular project that you're about to undertake? And with the expansion or new project that you're taking, can it last that 7 years? So that's what financial soundness gets to. The but-for test, as I explained previously, we evaluate that, and you get 5 points. Project readiness. So do you have your permits in place? How close to the permitting process are you? Do you have the site secured? And also, are you ready to go? Qualified management team, that's self-explanatory. Do you have the folks that have the ability to manage the project and work in the industry that the project is competing in? Business location, again, that's areas of high distress. So we look at are you located in an area of high distress, or do you have any of those secondary or primary options that we consider in terms of evaluating an area of higher distress? Then we also look at a rural project. If you're a rural project, you automatically get the 5 point kicker. Economic and export-based companies. So are those revenues the company derived outside of New Mexico? So if you manufacture a widget in the state of New Mexico, and you sell it outside the state, and that money comes back to your company within the state, that's defined as export and economic based companies. And then new capital investment. Are you expanding or building a new business within in the state of New Mexico? here are some projects that we have completed recently. Some of you who are in the Albuquerque area may have seen this particular project. It's the Hotel Park Central that's located on basically I-25 and Central Avenue. This was one of our earlier new market tax credit projects that has completed the 7-year compliance period. And what they basically did is took a old mental hospital and renovated it and made it into a 5-star hotel. This boutique hotel project has 74 rooms, and the one big thing about this particular project is that they had to restore this project based on the historic preservation office and the guidelines of the state historic preservation requirements. And so a lot of the windows and doors that are inside this hotel had to be meet the requirements of the historic society. So it was a very interesting project. The bank that financed this particular project was LAMB. Also, we twinned this with the new market tax credits and the historic tax credit financing. And this particular $17 million project received $2.1 million in equity from the new markets and historic tax credits. So this project, again, it was downtown. It was, dilapidated and became a negative or a sore spot in that community. And once they revitalized and renovate this particular project, it's been a successful project, and it continues to be a successful project. The one thing that we gained in terms of I'm drawing a blank, I'm sorry. The one thing about LAMB's participation in it was they were the first community bank to participate in a new market tax credit program from a community bank perspective, and also they bought some of the new market tax credits. So they were both the lender and the investor in this particular project. The next project I want to talk about is Vitality Works, and that's also located in Albuquerque. This particular project is a manufacturing company, and they produce a homeopathic or natural supplement in the state of New Mexico. What's interesting about this particular project, at the time that we undertook the project, they were evaluating either staying in Albuquerque or moving to Salt Lake City. And so with the new market tax credits, there was enough benefit from the equity on the sale of the tax credits that gave them the internal rate of return that they were looking for to decide to stay in New Mexico. So they purchased the old Spartan building when it was sitting empty on the west side of Albuquerque. And when they moved into the facility, it basically was half empty. So they figured that it would take 10 years to fill out that facility. In year 5, that facility is packed and they're bursting at the seams. And so because of the low-cost financing that was associated with the new market structure, they were able to take on additional contracts, expand their customer base. And so when you're talking about homeopathic projects or natural supplements, these guys make the private labels for Whole Foods, Sprouts, natural markets, and vitamin college. So any natural supplements, they probably made the supplements on behalf of those organizations and put Whole Foods label on it and sold it, and not realizing that it was made here in Albuquerque. The one thing about this particular project as well is they purchase a lot of the herbs and supplements from farms that are located within the state. So they purchase different plants that are essential for some of the homeopathic medicines and supplements that they make, and that is produced another market within the state of New Mexico, and had a huge impact on that particular industry. If you look at the capital stack and the sources of funds, U.S. Bank was the leverage lender, and also they being the company itself provided some loan monies as a parent company, and we were also fortunate enough to get $2 million from the investor, which is U.S. Bank, on this particular project. When we originally looked at this project, they estimated that they would create 41 jobs, and as of right now, we are verified that they have created 100 jobs at that particular facility. The next project that I want to talk about is the Pueblo of Laguna. The Pueblo of Laguna did this huge project on the Pueblo, and they had several different projects that we had invested in, but I want to talk about the water and wastewater project, so an infrastructure project. The Pueblo of Laguna is one of the largest pueblos in the state of New Mexico, and they have 6 different villages that are canvassing the total pueblo, and there's about 875 square miles. Their water system and wastewater system was falling apart, and just to give you an idea, the water system, the lines were made out of clay in some spots. Some spots there were old steel pipes in there, and they were all bursting, and sometimes they would have to shut down the school for a complete day and other businesses for a complete day because the water system was not an adequate water system and supply adequate water throughout the businesses at the Pueblo of Laguna. And so when they undertook this system, this was a $23 million project in which they received funds from the USDA. The Pueblo also contributed a lot of funds for this project, and also there was an additional $1 million of equity that came in from for this particular project. When it's all said and done, the New Market Tax Credit equity brought in $5 million to this particular project. And now, and as you can see in this slide, they had to bring the water lines down down the side of this cliff to get it down to different villages within the Pueblo. So once they were in the facility and completing and building new water lines, they decided that they will also start providing natural gas to 5 of the 6 villages, and then created a natural gas company on the Pueblo. So not only did they create a new utility system, but they also added natural gas as part of their services that they will provide. This is a huge project because it provides services and benefits that you would say is a community benefit for everybody at that Pueblo, and it was a great project, and they are pretty close to completing their 7-year compliance period. So in conclusion, with the New Market Tax Credit financing, and sort of a recap, the New Market Tax Credits do not finance 100% of a project. So if you get a $10 million allocation, it is not $10 million. But consider it 25% of the project, and it provides a perfect gap financing for a project that has a gap in their financing and their capital stack. The borrower is responsible for identifying and securing their leveraged loans, so that's through banks or capital campaigns or grants or various different funds. And that particular money will provide 75% of the total allocation, and the remaining 25% comes from the New Market Tax Credit financing. Also, remember, at the end of the 7-year compliance period, the loan is the new market tax credit loan is converted from debt to equity. Now, New Mexico Finance Authority and Finance New Mexico currently has invested in or received, I'm sorry, we have totally received $246 million of allocation from the U.S. Treasury CDFI fund. Right now, we have about $20,500,000 available through tax credit authority. The Finance Authority currently opens up around every quarter, and so we are anticipating that we're going to open up another round to use up the remaining $20 million in May of 2018. And one other thing I want to point out, we are going to be applying for more allocation because, as you know, $20 million of allocation is not that much allocation. So we will be submitting a new application packet to the CDFI as soon as they make allocation available. So the Finance Authority is soliciting pipeline projects. Those pipeline projects are not projects that are guaranteed to receive allocation, or nor does it commit you to receive financing or commit you to financing. But what we would like to do is show that the state of New Mexico does have the ability to support another $50 to $100 million of allocation. And so it's important for the state to put together a pipeline that will support another application to the Fed. So with that, here is our contact information for myself, John Brooks, Marquita Russell, and also our group email, which is nmtc@nmfa.net.
Thank you so much, John. I'm going to look at the questions, and let's see. So the first question, can you tell us again, oh, okay. This was a question that said, can you tell us again how great Vitality Works is? And then there is a question, and maybe Juan wants to talk to this. Have opportunity zones been determined? If you're on the call, Juan. No? Okay, so I'll speak to that. The state did apply for an extension for opportunity zones, and that, oh, there you are. If you want to take this question, it says, have opportunity zones been determined?
Yes, thank you. So we are currently in the process of sorting through the nominations for opportunity zones. As everyone may or may not be aware, the opportunity zones are in fact new markets tax credit qualified census tracts, and so they will be enhanced through this new program that would potentially make them more attractive in the future for investors. So the answer is we are currently sorting through the nominations. We have requested and received an extension, and so we will be delivering for the governor's consideration the final set by the 10th of April. But until that time, we'll continue to take comments via our website for any information we should take into consideration on the opportunity zones, but we are working diligently to get that accomplished.
Great, thanks. Well, I think that you did a fantastic job, John. There's no other questions. So that was a great presentation. I feel very demystified. And if anyone does have any follow-up questions, feel free to contact John or our team, and we'll get you in contact with John or the NMFA. Just in closing, I wanted to share some upcoming events that we have with the New Mexico Economic Development Department. On May 30th, we have our next workshop that is a part of the Rural Efficient Business Program, and that'll be in Deming. So that is for businesses that are located in the area that are interested in reducing their energy consumption. We have an engineer from IMNERD that will be on hand at the workshop giving information, and then she's available to give free energy assessments to businesses in the area. So if you're interested in that, feel free to register. It's free. We also talk about how to access the financing that's out there through the USDA to implement renewable energy sources. And it's a great place to network with area providers. And the next one after Deming will be Clovis, and then Carlsbad and Gallup. So hopefully you can join us on the road. And then our next FundNet meeting is June 5th. That'll be in Albuquerque at the Mid-Region Council of Governments. And you can go to the FundNet page and see upcoming webinars, and you can get the application. You can get the application there too if you're interested in applying. And then our next webinar will be about the credit enhancement program. That's a new program that we're enrolling with the Economic Development Department. So you can use this link and register for that. That's a collateral assistance program that's for businesses in New Mexico. So with that being said, here's our contact for the New Mexico Economic Development Finance team. And our webpage is on the bottom, and we will send this presentation out to everyone. And on behalf of everyone that attended in the department, I'd like to thank you, John, and the NMFA for your time and expertise, and encourage everyone to follow up with John if you have questions.
Thank you for allowing us to present, and we're glad to answer any questions or meet with folks in regards to new market tax credits.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. In the webinar. Okay.